So what's the greatest risk you'll ever take in your life? It's admitting what you want. It sounds so easy, right? But it's not, especially for lawyers. Why? Because according to a friend who's the dean at the University of Colorado Law School, it comes from one thing that all of us as lawyers do. We ride the escalator. What's the escalator? It's a social compact. We're taught it early on, right? You get good grades in high school, you'll go to a good college. You ride the escalator up. You get a good LSAT, you get a good SAT score, you go to an even better one. The escalator takes us up some more. Do well in college, good LSAT, you'll go to a good law school. We ride the escalator again. Trust me, I wrote it too. And it's taken us all, every one of us, to unbelievable places. It took you right here. Enjoy the view because that escalator has served you so well. But I'm telling you, if you hear only one thing I say today, the ride on the automatic escalator is over. In the real world, nothing is automatic. The escalator is gone. Instead, you now stand at the top of this amazing plateau. The escalator has vanished. But the good news is, while there's no more escalator, you're now surrounded by an infinite number of paths, all of them stretching out to unknown careers, unknown futures. And deep in your hearts, you all know this. You know that whatever crazy dream you have, you can go grab it. But ironically, even with that knowledge, it doesn't mean you'll admit what you really want in this life. Why? Because putting yourself out there, especially emotionally, is scary. If you admit what you want, you risk not getting it, and failure terrifies us. So how do you actually pull it off? How do you take the greatest risk you'll ever take in your life and admit what you want? You need to do 3 things. First, you need to remember what you love, especially about this place. When I graduated Michigan, my mentor Eli convinced me to move to Boston to work for him at Games Magazine, a crossword and puzzle magazine. So I moved all my stuff to Boston. I moved everything to Boston. He was going to be my mentor and take me under his wing. And when I finally get to Boston, the week I get there, Eli leaves the job. And I thought I wrecked my life. So I did what my entire life's work prepared me for. I cried, right? I watched the original Star Wars trilogy, and I did what all of us would do when we think we wrecked our lives. I said, I'm going to write a novel, right? Every one of you, I know. And I did. My first book was a book about the University of Michigan. I wrote it about 2 friends here, and that novel got me 24 rejection letters. To be clear, there were only 20 publishers. I got 24 rejection letters. But the day after I got my 23rd and 24th rejection letter, I said, if they don't like that book, I'll write another. And if they don't like that book, I'm going to write another. By that time, Eli was working in Washington, D.C., and he hired me back. He knew I loved to write now, and he said he wanted me to be a speechwriter. And the next day, I started my next book. What was that new book about? To me, the number one most fascinating thing in law school was when we learned how the Supreme Court actually worked. Not just how the voting worked, but the behind the scenes. That the research and the actual drafts of the decisions were entrusted to 26-year-old law clerks, people just like you who were fresh out of law school. For me, it became an obsession. So it was no surprise that one day, while daydreaming in a torts class, I came up with the idea for that next book. I wrote down the word Supreme Court, I wrote down the word clerk, and I circled it, and I wrote book idea on the top of it. That idea, the one thing I love more than anything else, became my first published novel, The 10th Justice, about a Supreme Court clerk who inadvertently leaks a decision before it's announced to the public. But again, that was my second book. I already had 24 rejections. So why didn't those rejections slow me down? Yes, because I was young and stubborn, but also because of that passion, that love I had for what I was working on. And I hope it will be the same for you. Choosing a career in the law is not just about asking which firm will pay you the most. On my very first day of law school, the dean told us, look at the front page of any newspaper. In every story, there's a lawyer. That means you can do anything with your law degree. So find what excites you. It sounds so easy to say if you love film and television, go into entertainment law. Or if you're passionate about the environment, work in environmental law, but it's true. Remember what you love. Remember what you do when no one's around and you have all the free time in the world. Of course, it's hard to do this. It's a scientific fact. Genetically, we're wired to embrace conformity. According to writer Tim Urban, back during the times of our Neanderthal ancestors, fitting in with those around you wasn't just convenient. It kept you alive. If you were different, you were tossed from the tribe. So humans developed an evolutionary need for social approval. Today, though, in our complex world of varying cultures and personalities, it's dangerous to lose what Urban calls your authentic voice. I love that idea, your authentic voice. The person you are deep at your core, the person you are when no one's around. The happiest lawyer I know is a friend of mine who graduated from this law school. Years ago, when we were living in Washington, D.C., his wife went into labor with their first child, and he rushed with her to the hospital. They hadn't packed any bags, and it was all happening so quickly, so he sent me to his house with a list of items to gather. Now imagine the moment when you get to walk into your friend's room and go through their drawers, right? You have no idea what you're going to find. And as I entered my friend's bedroom, you know what he had on his nightstand? An open copy of the University of Michigan Law Review. The Law Review next to his bed. That is the nerdiest reading material in the entire world. And I can promise you, if that were my nightstand, that is not what you would have found. But that's the best thing you can find. Why? Because he loves it. It's him. It's his authentic voice. He was that guy here who loved the big ideas of the law, the intellectual back and forth. And so it's no surprise that today he's an appellate lawyer, arguing cases before the Supreme Court. Am I like him? Of course not. Are any of you like him? Some of you are. What matters is that he's true to his voice. You need to be true to yours. Find what's on your mental nightstand and figure out how to bring it into your life. And after that first step of remembering what you love, the second step in admitting what you want is this: remember what scares you. My greatest fear in my entire life came when I was 13 years old. I was living in Brooklyn, New York. I came home from school at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and there was my father, sitting in shadow, in silhouette, in our apartment. I still see him in that big armchair in our living room. And when your father's home from work at 3 p.m., you know something's wrong. On that day, my dad was fired. He lost his job. He had no savings, nothing to fall back on. My father picked us all up and moved to Florida. He called it the do-over of life. We had no place to live. He had no job, only $1,200 to his name. My dad was always bad with money. And that moment scarred me for life, because in one bad day, I watched my whole life evaporate. Poof. My friends, where we lived, everything we had, gone. My whole life, my biggest fear is reliving what happened to my father. Not the loss of something stupid like money. I'm talking about the loss of stability, of safety, the fear of not even knowing where we'd live. That fear is what scares me. It's what terrifies me. But it is absolutely what drives me. It is the fire in my soul. Our greatest strengths are our greatest weaknesses, but our greatest weaknesses, if harnessed correctly, can be our greatest strengths. Back when I was 14 years old, my first job was scooping ice cream. I worked at the Haagen-Dazs in the Aventura Mall. By the time I was 17, a friend and I convinced the owner to let us be the managers of the store. And one day this woman came up to me and she snapped her fingers at me. And she said, "You need to serve me," she barked. And I said, "Ma'am, I'll be right with you." And she said, "Now." And we go back and forth, and eventually I tell her, "You know what, ma'am, when you talk to me like that, I'm not going to serve you." And she goes ballistic and she yells, "I want to see the manager." And I said, "Hold on, I'll get him for you." "Can I help you?" And she says, "You're not the manager." And I said, "Yes, I am, and I'm telling you, we're still not serving you." And she screams at me, "You're going to be working at this miserable ice cream store for the rest of your miserable life." And I said to her, "Ma'am, if I'm still working at this ice cream store for the rest of my miserable life, you're still never getting any ice cream." Trust me, I feel the same way. And for years, I used to tell that story laughing and saying it never bothered me. But today, for the very first time, I need to admit, it did bother me. It terrified me. It made me see that what happened to my dad, that was going to be my own future. It made me feel like my life would be small or somehow limited. But I also now realize that fear that this woman brought out in me, it fueled me. It drove me. Remember what scares you. When you're jealous of something, afraid of something, enraged by something, that's your body telling you care deep within you about whatever it is that's eating at you. So figure out what it is, embrace it, and let it be your own rocket fuel. So the greatest risk you'll ever take, you got to admit what you want. How? We talked about remembering what you love. We talked about remembering what scares you. Let's talk about the third and final way, remembering what brought you here in the first place. Every one of you graduates is a different person than you were 3 years ago when you first entered law school. But you all came here for a reason. For some of you, it was because you're a leader, a person who likes to be in charge. To paraphrase the great Greek philosopher Jerry Seinfeld, lawyers are the ones who read all the rules on the inside of the box top of Monopoly. So yes, some of you are here because you're well organized and smart, because you like order. Others are here for a sense of justice, of doing right, of standing up for people who need representation. Maybe you're here for this beautiful community, or maybe you're here because you're ambitious, or you're just the stubbornest, most single-minded person you know. Those are all good things. Don't apologize for who you are. They're the reasons you entered this place. Of course, the problem is life has a way of making you forget what brought you here. Bills come, and weddings come, and children come, and more bills come, and suddenly you're taking a job for a paycheck rather than for passion. I did it too, trust me. I understand the financial burden. By the time I was done with college and law school, I'm in a solid 5 figures of debt to pay off. And the weight of that burden terrified me. But here's the good news. You are graduating from the University of Michigan Law School. All of you are smart and accomplished, and you have a degree that will serve you forever. That's it. You won. Congrats, you actually won. It's true. The former dean of Yale Law School, Harold Coe, said it best. He said, you're a loaded weapon. So who do you want to fight for? Everyone has a right to a lawyer, but they don't have a right to you. You get to decide who you give your talents to. So when you look back on it 10 years from now, ask yourself, will you be proud of who you served? With that in mind, in these next few years, if you don't like your job, leave it. You'll find another. It's the one thing we're never supposed to talk about at a graduation, failure. It's going to happen. This isn't news. All of you, all of us, we will all fail. But I promise you this, if you don't fail, you also probably don't find happiness. And in those moments where you've lost sight of happiness, you know what to do? Hello, are you not listening to my awesome 3-point plan? Remember what brought you here. Every year you get older, it is harder to take risks. It's easier now. Life is a series of experiments. Does that mean you should go off and do something stupid? No, we're lawyers, we hate stupid. But if you go to try something new or something different, or even something where you use your training in other realms, which you can all do, that's the best part of this degree. I am proof of this. I know you'll manage your risk wisely, so don't be afraid to take that risk. One of my dearest friends decided that it was time to look somewhere else for a legal job. So he gave his notice. But 2 weeks into that notice, he was swirling with regret. He always wanted to be an assistant U.S. attorney. He felt like he owed it to himself. He needed to just try. That's why he went to law school. For a strong sense of justice, he had to try. And then 3 hours after his daughter was born, with the hospital band still on his wrist, he went down to his interview. Did he get the job? Well, actually, no, he didn't. He failed. But a few years later, he applied again, never losing track of that thing that drove him to law school in the first place. And that second time, of course he got the job. He's one of the happiest lawyers I know. And I'm now realizing that all of my friends have their greatest epiphanies when they're racing to the hospital. But there you go. What's the greatest risk you'll ever take? Admitting what you want. How do you admit it? Remember what you love, remember what you fear, and remember what brought you here in the first place. And when you're armed with that information, what do you do now? You jump. Life used to be an escalator. Today, it's a trapeze. It's terrifying. It's exhilarating. But when you make that leap to your authentic self, I promise you, it will be glorious.